This next set is a split stitch. So the biggest thing with a split stitch is you need to have an even number of strands on your needle. So this time I have 4, so either 4, 2, or 6 will work. You have to have an even number because we'll be splitting the stitch in half. So I'm going to just start here and bring my needle up and down in a little straight stitch. And then I am going to bring my needle back up in the center of the stitches, splitting it. So it looks similar to like a chain stitch, but it's not quite the same thing because it's not a continuous stitch. And then at the end of the stitch, I'm going to bring my needle back up through the last stitch, but instead of extending it, it's just going to end at the base of the line. Now let's jump over here and we'll look at how to do this on a curved line. The biggest thing with this is you definitely want to have short stitches, or else you're going to get a weird webbing on the thread from being pulled in different directions. But if you keep your stitches short, you'll avoid that. So that is stitching a split stitch on a curved line. If you have gapping, like this one for some reason is kind of gapped up here, I'm just going to make an additional stitch up here and then tuck it underneath the one that's right next to it. So I'm going to bring my needle carefully up into that same spot or into the spot close to it on the other side of the stitch, and then when you tuck it down, it hides the gapping and fixes it. And this is to demonstrate how to do a split stitch on a straight corner. So because I'm not on a curve, I can do longer stitches, and I'm coming up in the center of that stitch down to the corner, and I'm coming up in the center again. So center as in splitting it, yes, but right now I'm referring to the center as in lengthwise, the center of that. So instead of going past this line, I'm going to come down to the same spot, or right close to the same spot of where I ended my previous stitch. So it's still split. And then I'm going to come over here, and I'm not going to start in that same spot or else it'll unwind my stitches. I'm going to start over right here, go back to this spot, and then continue down this line, splitting the stitches. Then we're going to do a shape that connects to itself. So we've got this cute little circle here. And when I'm doing this circle, instead of making my stitch in the center, the lengthwise center of the stitch, I'm actually going to bring it a little bit closer to the edge. That way I can go a little bit longer without my stitches can be a little bit longer. If you don't go all the way to the edge, if you go in the middle, then they're shorter and it can get a little bit fat, like the thread kind of built up on itself. So closer to the edge, sometimes you can see the split a little bit more. So on this first stitch, you can really see where that split is. So if you don't want that texture, then make your stitches closer together. And sometimes you'll notice that I am bobbing my needle up and down a couple times. On this stitch, that's because I am either on the outside of the strands of thread or I've only picked up one. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to reposition my needle to be in the center or right in between both sides of the strands. If you're doing just 2 strands, that can be a good way to practice because you'll be able to really easily see if you have a strand on each side of the needle. If you're doing 4 strands, sometimes it's hard to tell if you have just 1 or if you do have 2 on each side. Now here on this last stitch, I'm going to bring my needle up and plant it in the middle of the one where I started. Then I'm going to do it again and bring it up right in the center as if I was still going, but I'm going to tuck it down here. And then my circle is complete. So that's for tracing a circle. If we want to use a fill stitch or a split stitch as a fill stitch, here's how to do it. It's actually really fun. So using this as a fill stitch, let's make sure we start where we're going on the outside of the stencil so that we can make sure it's all the way covered by the time we're done. And we're going to alternate a little bit on where we bring these threads down. So it's not all going to be at this length. We're going to vary where some are really short up here, some are a little longer. We're going to just go across this shape, putting it in different spots. And so I'm going to split my strands here, come down, and then I'm just going to repeat doing that, like I said, in coming down in different spots so that all the splits don't line up in the same place. So let's do this one really short. And on this one, I'll do 3 stitches instead of just 2. It's kind of fun that you can just be more random on this. It doesn't have to be super neat. Now I'm noticing that this is getting really bulky in the middle. So I'm actually going to just like do a little skip thing here where I'll make a stitch up here at the top. And then I'm going to leave a space here and bring the stitches up again at the bottom. Another thing I'm noticing is that this bottom is looking really smooth where the top has more texture. So I am going to bring my next stitch almost all the way down the shape. Just right here at the end. I'm going to leave it blank. And then I am going to split it up here a little higher and come down. So as you move across the shape, just pay attention to where the texture is. Try to keep it balanced where you have a straight line coming here on the edge and you don't get too many bulky spots. And if you notice that one section starts to get smooth, plan a split in that section. The split stitch as a fill stitch is my favorite fill stitch to use, especially on big areas, because the stitches are really secure. So if you're doing anything bigger than like a 1/2 inch, a split stitch is the way to go, because the stitches won't come loose. See, they're really secure in their spot. They're not going to wiggle around, and the texture is just really interesting. So if, as you're going, you realize that part of your stitches don't really line up, this is such a tiny spot that I didn't even notice as I was going. It is 1 thread length different, but with this dark color on the contrasting thread, or on the contrasting fabric, it's really noticeable. So before I keep going, I'm going to bring my thread up here on the outside edge of that, and then I'm just going to tuck a stitch in here anywhere. That way I'll be able to smooth out that line a little bit and it won't be very noticeable. And you can do that as many times as you need to. And I just love the texture that a split stitch does in a fill stitch, as a fill stitch. So that's that on a straight line. Now, a little bit more challenging is a curved shape or an unusual shape like this. And you'll actually run into this quite a bit because this is the shape of like flower petals, or just a lot of different things you stitch are going to have curves in them. So I am kind of building myself what I call a skeleton. And in lots of different fill stitches, a skeleton is really important because you can keep track of where you need to go, and it helps you make the correct angles. So I'm starting on the very outside edge and doing a split stitch about just almost to the top here. Then I'm going to start down here in the middle, or here in the middle, up here, down here. Not sure which way is up, but we're going to go here and do a split stitch down the center of the shape. And then I'll start on this side and do the same thing. And if you're finding that your stitches are starting to be like noticeably separated, you might be pulling too tight on your floss as you come up and down. If to prevent that, when you're pulling your needle up, pull gently. If you pull really tight, then you're going to see more tension on the thread, and that's going to cause the splitting, and just overall it's going to look kind of funky. So now I have my little skeleton built. I'm just going to go through this and start filling it in. And on this curved shape, because we're not going in the straight lines, you are going to like kind of start crisscrossing the threads and filling them in over the top of each other. And it's just kind of fun and random and hodgepodgey, but it gives the final effect is so fun because it has so much texture in it. It's a little tricky to see on the video, and it's a little bit more noticeable with lighter threads to see that texture. So you're in for a special treat when you do this on your own projects. Then up here where it's like wider at the top, you're definitely going to have some gaps. So over that gap, I'm just going to add in another stitch, and I'm going to just overlap a little bit on this one. You kind of just make it up. It's really fun. So then I'm going to split that stitch and work my way back down. And that stitch looked really long, and it was noticeable that it wasn't split. So I'm going to split it and bring it back down to the bottom again. And if you notice me bobbing my needle up and down like this, all I'm doing is trying to find the right spot. So it becomes easier as you go to know where to put your needle, but it's still not like automatic. So I usually have to take a couple tries to make sure my needle's coming up in the right spot. Now on this kind of a shape, if there's anywhere that feels really uneven on the edges, we can just add these little tiny stitches in the gaps. The little tiny stitches don't have to split another stitch, but they fill in that area in a way that like hides the gap. And where this one is like on the edge and they're really, really tiny gaps, but just enough that it's not very smooth, I'm actually going to change directions of stitches, which is like a lot of the times kind of a no-no.